So what vegetable seeds can you sow in May? Well, May is a fantastic month, and it's probably the month out of the whole year when you can sow the most vegetables. We're now well into spring, the temperatures are slowly starting to increase, the risk of frost has significantly diminished, and days are a lot longer, so there's lots more light, so there's a perfect opportunity to sow vegetable seeds. Now, there is such a wide choice of vegetables that you could sow in May, but in this video I've selected 10 that I'm going to share with you that I'll be sowing in May, just to give you one or two ideas. I'll also be sharing my favourite varieties with you so that you can try them out for yourself if you wish. Now, it's always worth mentioning for these types of videos that I'm based in the centre of the UK in growing zone number 8. So if you are located in different parts of the world and therefore different growing zones, you might need to slightly adjust your sowing dates, so make sure you check the backs of your packets just to confirm the correct time for you to sow. So let's dive into my seed box as I share my 10 varieties with you. Now, in May, most of the varieties of vegetables that I'm going to suggest can be sown outdoors if the temperature is right. So early May might be a little bit early for some of these varieties, but if you have a particularly warm May, it might be worthwhile thinking about planting them directly into the ground. Alternatively, you'll start them in cell trays and then just move them out when the temperature is warm enough. And the first vegetable that I'm going to suggest for sowing in May very much fits into that category, and that is beans. I'm going to suggest 2 varieties of beans that I've grown before that are absolutely fabulous. The first one is a dwarf bean called Ferrari. As a dwarf bean, it doesn't climb high at all, but produces really lovely round beans, really nice and tender. If you've not tried Ferrari, that's well worth trying. The other variety is a variety I grew for the first time last year, and that's a variety called Blue Lake. Now, in my garden, because I've got a smaller growing space, I'm going to favour the climbing French beans, because clearly if I can grow vertically, that's going to give me much more capacity to grow vegetables in a smaller area. So even though I will be planting a few Ferrari in one of my raised beds, most of the beans that I'll be planting this year are going to be the climbing variety, and this is the one I'll be using, Blue Lake. Now, if you are going to start beans indoors in cell trays, they typically like temperatures around about 15 degrees centigrade, which is about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, in order to germinate. Plant them at a depth of 2.5 centimetres, which is 25 millimetres or an inch, and cover them with compost, and they should germinate in 7 to 14 days, and you'll keep them indoors until they're ready to plant out. If you are going to plant them directly outside, then make sure you plant them with sufficient spacing, because remember, that is going to be their permanent position. Ideally, that will be 45 centimetres, 450 millimetres or 18 inches apart. When I plant beans directly outside, I always plant 2 together. That means you've got a better chance of germination, because if you plant them individually and one doesn't germinate, you're going to have gaps in your beans. But if you plant 2 together, then there's a better chance of germination. If both of those seeds do germinate, then you can either gently lift and separate, or just cut one of them off, and that'll still leave you with one healthy and vibrant plant in order to grow. So my first recommendation of vegetable seeds to sow in May is beans. Now, next we have a really popular veg that can be sown outdoors in May, and that's carrots. There's nothing like homegrown carrots. And even though you may argue that carrots are one of the cheapest vegetables you can buy, there is a difference in homegrown carrots, so it's well worth planting them, and they're easy to grow. Now, these can actually be sown directly outdoors from March until July, but when you get to May, the temperature's a little bit warmer. It's a much better environment for them. If you are going to make early sowings before May, they may need a little bit of protection with fleece or cloches, but when you get to May, that's not usually necessary. I'm growing a variety that I've grown for many years called Autumn King 2, and I know a lot of people like this variety. Always produces a really good crop of carrots. Now, when you are sowing your carrot seeds, a raised bed is an ideal place to grow carrots because of the raised sides. It helps to reduce the potential risk of carrot root fly. So ideally, you want to plant your carrot seeds into pre-prepared fine soil or compost to a depth of 1.5 centimetres or 15 millimetres, which is roughly half an inch. So these are not sown too deeply. Then you'll cover them with compost, water them, and you should see germination within 14 to 21 days. Now, because when you sow them, they're quite small seeds, you can sow them quite close together. So when they start to emerge and get large enough, you might need to thin them out slightly just to give them enough space to grow. There's no reason why you can't grow carrots in bunches, but you tend to get smaller carrots by doing it that way. What I will do is wait for them to get to the size when I can thin them out, and that usually gives me some quite large carrots. Now, it'd be difficult to do a veg sowing video in May without mentioning lettuce. Lettuce are one of my absolute favourite vegetables to grow, and there's such a great variety of them. and they're so easy, and we always like a regular supply of lettuce throughout the year, so May is a good time to continue sowing lettuce. You can sow them directly outdoors from March onwards, but just like I've mentioned for the carrots, ideally you want to wait till round about May to start to sow them directly outdoors. Or, as you can see in front of me, I've already started to sow a few in cell trays inside to transfer out when the weather gets warm enough. As I mentioned, lettuce are really easy to grow, and there is a video on my channel showing you how to grow lettuce, which I'll put a link to in the video description below, showing you how to grow lettuce right from sowing the seeds right the way through till harvest, so check that out if you get a chance. And there are such a variety of fantastic lettuce available, but I've chosen 3 varieties for the video that I'll be planting at the beginning of May. The first one is a variety called Webb's Wonderful. The second one is a variety called Iceberg 2. And the third one, and those of you who are regulars to the channel will know that this is my favourite, it's a variety called Lakeland. And with lettuce, I've already sown some in April, I'll continue to sow them in May, and I'll sow them every 3 weeks in small amounts in order to get a successive supply all the way through the summer and into the autumn period. Lettuce seeds are sown in a very similar way to the way that you would sow the carrots, to a depth of around about 1.5 centimetres, 15 millimetres or half an inch, covered with compost and then watered, and you'll find that they will germinate fairly quickly. In May, probably between 10 to 14 days. If you sow these in June and July, they'll germinate quicker because it's usually warmer, and therefore you may get 7 to 10 days germination. But lettuce are a fantastic vegetable to sow in May, and these are 3 fantastic varieties for you to try for yourselves. Now, peas also seem to be a really big favourite of the vegetable grower, and when we get to May, they can start to be planted directly outdoors. Now, a variety I continually grow is a variety that I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. It's called Calvert and Wonder. Always produces a really good crop of peas. But something else I also like to grow is Munch 2. This is a variety called Oregon Sugar Pod, and one that I have grown for years. And the reason I like Munch 2 so much, it's absolutely fantastic for things like stir fries. And this variety produces really nice crispy vegetables, so definitely try that if you haven't, Oregon Sugar Pod. If you are going to sow them directly outside, then pre-prepare the ground and then sow them at round about 2 inches, which is about 5 centimetres or 50 millimetres deep, and cover them with compost and then water. Now, because peas climb, you will need to provide some form of support, so as they get higher they'll be supported. Now, the seed packets will tell you that the peas should be placed around about 3 inches or 75 centimetres apart, but I'm not as precise as that, so if they are a little bit closer they always tend to grow for me. But it's also worth remembering that if you are going to sow peas directly outside, they will need protection, because when they emerge they're a favourite for pigeons and other birds and other insects, so you will need to net them over just to give them a bit of protection until they establish. Now, those of you that are regular to the channel will know that I'm always going to recommend swede or rutabaga, one of my favourite vegetables. And May is a perfect time to start thinking about sowing seeds directly outdoors. The variety I always recommend is a variety called Helena, and over the last few years it's produced so many wonderful sized swedes for me that I don't really need to look for other varieties. These can be sown directly outside from May to July. Again, prepare the ground and then sow them to a depth of 1.5 centimetres or around about half an inch. You'll notice the seeds are very small, so they won't need to be sown too deeply. Now, don't underestimate the amount of space that swedes or rutabaga will need. When they do start to grow, the leaves or the foliage on top can start to get very large, so they do need an appropriate amount of space. Ideally, you want about 45 centimetres or 18 inches between rows, and then around about 25 centimetres, 250 millimetres or 10 inches between plants. And when they do start to grow, just make sure that they are weeded regularly and watered regularly. Now, because of the space that these do take up, and because I've got a smaller growing area, I'm going to try 1 or 2 of these in pots and see how they go, so watch out for future videos to see how I get on with them. Now, another veg that's quite similar to swede and very versatile and really easy to grow is turnips. And again, these can be sown directly outdoors in May. If you are going to sow them directly into the ground outdoors, then that needs to be at a depth of around about 2.5 centimetres, which is around about an inch. And they should germinate within 14 to 21 days. If you are going to sow swede or turnips directly outside, then you will need to protect them. Because like a lot of vegetables, birds are attracted to them, particularly young seedlings, so you will need to provide some netting over these to keep them protected, particularly while they're young seedlings. Now, the variety I'll be sowing in May is a variety called Snowball. I did grow these last year and they've produced really nice turnips. I have in the past grown a variety called Purple Top Milan, which have also been really successful. But turnips are a great variety of vegetables to start sowing in May. Now, a lot of vegetables lend themselves to being started indoors in cell trays and then planted outside when they're large enough. But one vegetable that I recommend that you sow outdoors every time is beetroot. I've never found it to be a vegetable that transplants very well. It doesn't like being moved, so it makes sense that you sow them directly outside. And May is the perfect time for doing that. And again, another fantastic vegetable, beetroot. There's so many great varieties to choose from, and over the years I've had a lot of success with beetroot. A really popular variety, and one that I'm sure most of you will be aware of, is one called Boltardy, and that's one I've grown for many years. But one that I grew last year for the first time that I was really impressed with is a variety called Monetta. So if you've not tried Monetta or Boltardy before, then definitely try these two varieties. I'm sure you'll be impressed with the type of beetroot that they actually produce. My beetroots are going to be sown directly into this raised bed here just behind me to a depth of 1.5 centimetres, which is around about ½ inch. And if sown in May, they should germinate within 14 to 21 days. The beetroot seeds are like little clusters, and they are large enough to pick up individually, so you can plant them exactly at the distances that you want them to be in. You could sow them two together, and that gives you a higher probability of germination, and then if they both germinate, you could gently try and separate them or cut one of them. Now, another vegetable that can be sown directly outdoors in May is cauliflower. You can start cauliflowers indoors between January and April if you wish, if you want to start early, but May is the time when you might start thinking about sowing them directly outdoors. Now, I'm aware of quite a lot of vegetable growers that struggle to grow cauliflowers for all sorts of different reasons, but I would encourage you to persist with trying to grow them, because when you grow your own fresh homegrown cauliflowers, there's nothing like them. Now, this is a really common variety called all the year round, and as you can probably guess by the name of the variety, it suggests you can sow it pretty much at any time. Now, cauliflower, being a member of the brassica family, would mean that when you do sow these, you will need to protect them with netting. Now, the seeds are very small, so you'll need to put them in good compost or good soil at a depth of around about 1.5 centimetres or 15 millimetres or ½ inch. Cover them with compost and then water them. Now, in May, they should germinate between 14 and 28 days. And when the seedlings get to a height of 10 centimetres or 4 inches tall, you will need to thin them out and transplant them, and you would need to give them a reasonably good distance of around about 60 centimetres or 600 millimetres between plants, because they will need a little bit of space. Keep them well watered, and remember, they will need some protection from birds and other insects. So cauliflower is another great veg to start to sow outdoors in May. And now that I've just mentioned cauliflower, it makes sense that I make my next recommendation, which is cabbage. Now, with cabbage, you will need to check the variety to see when it can be sown, because different varieties need to be sown at different times. Now, I've got two great varieties for you that I'll be sowing in May, which you might think about sowing yourself. The first one is Greyhound, and the second one is Golden Acre. Both of them fantastic cabbage and well worth a go. In terms of their sowing and transplanting and care, it's very similar to what I've just described for cauliflowers. The seeds are a very similar size to cauliflowers, and cabbage will be sown at a very similar depth at around about 1.5 centimetres, which is ½ inch. Now, if these cabbage seeds are sown in May, they should germinate in around about 14 to 21 days. To transplant these, you want to wait till the plants have got 4 or 5 leaves on them, and then thin those plants out to their final positions of 45 centimetres or 450 millimetres, which is around about 18 inches. But remember, just like cauliflowers, these will need protection. The thing about the brassica family is that everything seems to like them. Every insect and bird seems to love brassicas. So if you don't provide protection for them with netting, they won't last very long. So if you haven't tried these varieties of cabbage before, Greyhound and Golden Acre, it's well worth giving them a try, and May is the perfect time to sow them. Now, for my last recommendation, I was going to recommend radishes, because they're so easy to grow and they can be grown at any time of year. But as I was looking through my seed box, I came across these, which is mizuna, and this is a variety called Wado. And these are a wonderful leaf vegetable such as lettuce or rocket that you can grow that have this almost like mustardy flavour. So it gives a very different type of flavour into your salads and your stir fries. Now, when it gets to May, these can be sown directly outside, but this is a fantastic vegetable that you can grow at any time of year indoors, because it doesn't mind cooler temperatures. When I had my allotment, I had this in my polytunnel all through the winter, and it's one of those crops that are called cut and come again. You cut them and they keep growing back. So if you've never tried mizuna before, then definitely give it a go because it's easy to grow, it's really tasty, and it's a fantastic vegetable to supplement so many different types of recipes. It's definitely worth growing. Now these will be sown to a depth of 2.5 centimetres, which is 25 mil or 1 inch, and when they get large enough you'll thin them out to about 10 centimetres apart or 4 inches. And if you're doing them in rows, then round about 12 inches or 30 centimetres between rows. I don't really see many other videos recommending mizuna, but it's definitely well worth a try. So if you haven't tried this before, definitely give it a go. So there you have 10 fantastic vegetables that I'm going to be sowing in May, and I hope that's given you 1 or 2 ideas. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's such a lot of choice of what you can sow in May, and what I've done in this video is selected 10 of my favourites. But it would be really interesting to know what you're sowing in May. So if you're sowing other vegetables, or if you've got recommendations of varieties that I haven't covered in the video, then pop them in the comments below, because it's great for viewers of the channel to share these types of ideas, to give them ideas for themselves. But I really hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. But if you want to subscribe to the channel for how to sow and grow fruit and veg and flowers and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, then don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.